Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
So Ben, we're recording this on Tuesday. It's election day in Virginia and a bunch of places. Should we just do two versions? So like one to use if Terry wins, one if Youngkin wins, so that we can be sort of like smug and self-righteous no matter what?
Yeah. I mean, or two versions, the exit poll version and then the final poll
Then the
version.
results that are totally different.
The results version, yeah. I don't like
I
every
love
election.
hate elections.
Yeah, they all feel like existential now. That's the problem.
They really
even
do.
off-year Virginia gubernatorial
I
elections
know,
feel like the future of
I know.
democracy.
All right. We'll try to focus our brains on the globe today because we have big news coming out of the climate change summit that's happening in Glasgow right now as we speak, and about the G20 that just happened. We'll have the latest fallout from the coup in Sudan. A Gitmo detainee details CIA torture in court for the first time. We'll do a section about morally bankrupt billionaires in Saudi Arabia. Stay tuned for that. It's a lot of fun. The skeptical take on Havana syndrome, real housewives of the Gulf. Facebook unintentionally makes us laugh. And then we dive into the JFK assassination conspiracy theories. Then there is a huge group of world leaders in Glasgow, Scotland. One last chance for me to get that name wrong.
Glasgow.
They're talking about climate change. You're going to go there pretty soon. You're leaving later this week. Let's start with the bad news about what's come out. So neither Xi Jinping nor Vladimir Putin are attending in person. That's not good. China and Russia are the first and fourth biggest emitters of carbon dioxide by country. Would prefer them to be there. Also not great that the general scientific consensus is that the world needs to limit the amount that the planet warms to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So far, we have warmed the planet by 1.1 degrees Celsius. But the emissions targets, the pledges from various countries that have been made, don't get close to achieving that 1.5 goal. In some cases, most cases, really, I think they're only pledges and not actual policies or laws. So that's the downside of what's happening so far.
Bummer.
Very quick roundup of some of the good news. All the G20 countries finally acknowledged that we have to hit that 1.5 Celsius target. That actually is a big deal and gets everyone, rowing the same direction. India surprised a lot of people by announcing that they would get to net zero carbon emissions by 2070, and that by 2030, half of India's electricity will be from renewable sources. So that's great. More than 80 countries pledged to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Scientists believe that methane is responsible for nearly 1/3 of global warming to date. So getting rid of that would be a big deal. So, Ben, that's just a few of like the many pledges and side deals and, conversations that are happening at this conference. There's more about financial support for developing countries, agreements to stop deforestation, right? Everybody's trying to do this while not creating some massive economic impact on their citizens that leads to another yellow vest protest style, problem in Europe. I find myself sympathizing with the leaders who are inside the summit, just trying to move the ball forward painfully and get stuff done. I find myself sympathizing with the activists outside who are furious that not enough is getting accomplished this week. What do you make of the event so far? Like, how are you feeling on your sort of like climate dread, thermometer?
I mean, they are lacking the kind of big new sets of announcements that kind of fell like dominoes on the way into Paris, so like there just wasn't the same momentum leading into this thing. But to your point, they're tackling some of the structural aspects of the climate challenge. Methane in particular, the U.S. has clearly been focused on, and that's a very welcome announcement, because this is one of the areas where you have to kind of focus collectively on how do we just get rid of this
And
stuff.
it's so achievable. It's like plumbing. You go tighten up the hose or pipe.
Yeah, and
won't
really,
make methane anymore.
this is one of those insane things where we were beginning to do this at the end of the bomb years, and then Trump just, rolled that back, and then everybody lets their foot off the gas around the world. And so that's a positive. There was an announcement around ending deforestation by 2030. And to me, this encapsulates in miniature the whole problem/potential of this summit, right? On the one hand, you really do feel like everybody, with the exception of most of the Republican Party, like gets it, right? Like everybody at least feels compelled to make commitments and
certainly
to be
internationally
moving in this direction.
Right, like green parties are rising, like
exactly.
Concern about climate's rising, and all these polls that Pew did around the world.
Yeah, and so something like saying we're going to end deforestation by 2030 is like important, but like, do we have 10 years to cut down the Amazon? And
no, it could be irreversible.
Yeah, so it's kind of like this. What's so difficult about judging it is that we're beginning to really fill in some of the details and make some more progress off of what the foundation was in Paris, but the time is just not there, you know? And so it's this kind of race against the clock. And I don't think any scientist, believes that we are moving with enough speed to catch up with that clock, but we're moving, you know, and that's, that's part of the complexity of this whole thing. And I think one of the challenges for activists is going to have to be, look, you're not going to get everything you want at this summit, but that's all the more reason to just kind of hold people's feet to the fire so that these commitments, because you're hearing a lot of commitments, we're going to do this by 2030 and this by 2050 and this by 2070, right?
It can be a wash in
what
numbers.
What is underneath that? What is going to actually get us there? The basic philosophy that you guys have talked about in PSA, we've talked about, is that if there's enough momentum behind transitioning, that the global economy will just kind of course correct in that direction. Clean energy will take the place of fossil fuels. But the question is, as that is happening, because that clearly is happening, how are you just getting rid of the dirty stuff faster? And how are you saving things like the Amazon faster? And we're not going to know the answer to that, I think, at the end of Glasgow.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. Credit to our British friends for making a full court press here, bringing out the big guns. They got David Attenborough speaking. They got the Queen delivering a message. Boris Johnson found religion on climate change over the past decade or so. He was kind of an asshole about it for a long time. Biden apologized for Trump's decision to pull out of Paris. Ben, putting on your crass political hack hat, do you think that's going to be on Fox News nonstop for the next 3 years, or are we past this apology tour idiocy?
I think we're kind of past it. It's kind of funny, seeing him do it, and it wasn't that big a deal.
Yeah, no one seemed to care.
Like no one seemed to care. And look, of all the insane stuff Trump did, you can lose sight of the fact that Republican climate denialism is going to be one of the things that looks just the strangest and most reckless and sadistic with time.
Next to vaccine.
Like him standing up there and saying he cares about Pittsburgh, not Paris, is kind of hackish announcement. So, I think, that shows that things have changed, right? Like just going to a climate change summit was once controversial in this country, right? Nobody's really questioning that anymore. Even Republicans who don't even fully acknowledge the reality of climate change, they're not putting up much of a fight because they know that, particularly demographically to young people, this is issue one. You know, and you can kind of laugh at David Attenborough and all these people, but that's
I'm not laughing. I love David.
No,
Attenborough.
Not you. I would never say that. But
Thank you.
I know you like.
I
me
watch
share
all these nature
a
shows.
passion for planet Earth and all the rest of it. But there's something positive about the just culturally. Politicians can't evade at least trying to look like they care about this. Even Boris Johnson is talking about it's 1 minute to midnight. I do think there's a positive collective pressure from voters, first and foremost, but then activists and even cultural figures just saying hey, this is the thing you guys can't get wrong.
Yeah, this matters.
Yeah.
This matters to all of us. So the COP26 climate summit came right after the G20 summit in Rome, a lot of summits. Some big takeaways I saw from the G20. Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, met with his Chinese counterpart for about an hour to prepare for this virtual summit between Biden and Xi Jinping later this year. As we mentioned, Xi Jinping is not getting on planes anymore. I guess he needs a jab and a Xanax to get him going. We'll see what happens here. Everybody at the G20 tried to smooth over tensions with Turkey and President Erdogan. Seems like they've kind of papered over it, but none of the underlying issues are really resolved. The French are still pissed at the UK over fishing rights. The French are also pissed at Australia over the nuclear submarine deal with the US that we've talked about 1,000 times. This was the big thing, I think, Ben. More than 130 countries agreed to set a minimum corporate tax rate of 15%, so we can hopefully stop the practice of multinational corporations pretending that they're incorporated in Ireland or whatever to create a tax shelter and not pay taxes. Leaders also pledged to vaccinate 70% of the world's population against COVID-19 by mid-22. Biden hung out with the Pope for 90 minutes, which I'm sure was hugely important to him personally. What do you think? What do you make of the G20? The corporate minimum tax seems like a big deal. Anything else worth highlighting that came out of this?
I think on that one, this has been kind of something that has been building over the course of the year. They talked about it at the G7, then they went and tried to get other countries to sign up to it. And I think they deserve some credit on this
Yeah, I
thing.
do too.
This is a big deal. The inequality in the world is fueling a lot of the grievance that you see in politics everywhere. It's obviously just economically unfair. You got people, tax cheats and tax havens. and they do seem to be using the architecture of the G7, the G20, these international institutions to just methodically try to establish this kind of norm of a global minimum tax and then get enough people invested in it that it has some meaning. So, there's more work to be done there, but I think the discipline they showed on this, clearly is bearing some result. You did see the hangover. I mean, you talk about the apology tour, like he kind of had to make nice. He, told Macron that it was clumsy. I think that was necessary, right?
Yeah, a little hat in hand.
Yeah, but it wasn't. Again, the Xi Jinping wasn't there. Putin wasn't there. It used to be, having gone to like 8 G20s, one of the highlights, not because it was fun, but in terms of consequence, was usually there's a big meeting between the U.S. president and the Chinese president. Usually you see Putin there, and there's some drama around that. So there was a little less, torqued up because that was absent. The Pope thing was interesting to watch. That, that is, I remember that's a singular experience of being president. Like to go visit the Pope, and I think it highlighted again that Pope Francis. I think Biden said something along the lines of like, this man is every reason why I'm a Catholic, which I thought was a powerful statement about, Francis representing social justice and sometimes you can forget he's there, in this kind of pretty bleak political landscape out there. So hopefully got some moral support. I can't help but mention that the biggest project we did with them was the Cube opening. So I hope Pope Francis put a little pressure, a little moral suasion there on Joe Biden to kind of make life a little better for the Cuban people. But yeah, it seemed like a positive outcome, but it also seemed devoid of some of the drama that sometimes plays out, in part because not all leaders were there, and the climate summit was the bigger of the summits. Yeah,
the prickly customers weren't there. Since we're talking about an event in Italy, the G20, we should mention that Italy's Senate recently voted down a bill that would have made violence against LGBT and disabled people and misogyny a hate crime. So we're talking about Italian politics. The proposal came after a series of attacks on LGBT people and a rise in hate crimes that a lot of activists in Italy think is linked to an increased popularity of Matteo Salvini's far-right League Party. Unfortunately, the Vatican, Pope Francis, hope you're listening, has been an impediment to progress here on trying to label these attacks against gays and lesbians as hate crimes. So thanks for hosting the summit, Italy. Thanks for doing the fun little coin toss into the Trevi Fountain with all the world leaders, but maybe get your own shit together.
Yeah. I mean, there's been this troubling stigmatization of the LGBT community. Putin has made them a target, and then you've seen Orban recently trying to make them a target in Hungary. This is kind of spreading around the European far right, troublingly at times spilling over into some of the kind of Christian right parties that may not normally be on the far right. So it's something that requires vigilance, really. It just requires people standing up and expressing solidarity against that. I think in terms of the Vatican, this is one of those areas where, Francis, has not been exactly a progressive on these issues, but he has been a little bit ahead of the Vatican bureaucracy on this one, in just terms of how he talks about it. But it's a reminder that even the Pope doesn't have control over everything in his own bureaucracy, and you can get complacent because there have been so many gains for LGBT people in this country and other places, but you can't take your eye off the uglier dynamic that's playing out in a lot of spaces.
And how it folds into these far-right parties. Let's do an update from Sudan. So about a week ago, the Sudanese military staged a coup and took over the country. Since that time, there have been major demonstrations all across Sudan. The government has repeatedly cut phone and internet service, but despite that, tons of videos and photos of the protests are getting out anyway. It's pretty amazing, the courage that's being shown. There's also some really scary reports that at least a dozen protesters have been killed. I've seen over 100 wounded. The U.S., as we discussed last week, has condemned the coup. The U.S. has held up $700 million in aid to Sudan and has been talking with Egypt and the UAE to try to push them to play a helpful role in resolving what's happened. It's an interesting anecdote here, Ben. There was a senior Israeli official quoted anonymously in Israel's biggest free newspaper. And this person was criticizing the U.S. response to the coup and basically arguing that, although democracy is good in theory, the Sudanese military is more likely to cut deals with the U.S., cut deals with Israel, and improve ties. So therefore, the U.S. should just pipe down about this coup being bad and just kind of back it. I do think that speaks to, kind of a post-Arab Spring, post-Abraham Accords mindset that, prioritizes stability with bad actors maybe over the messiness of democracy that might make unwinding this whole process even harder. The UN, South Sudan, a lot of others are trying to broker talks, find some sort of resolution. How are you feeling about the odds of this thing getting resolved peacefully, given what we've seen over the last week?
I don't feel very good about it. And, I came back a couple times when this issue came up to the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Egyptians, who have a lot of sway with the Sudanese military. And we talked last week about the Abraham Accords and how it kind of plays into this idea that the pathway to stability is through these kind of military regimes. You either have the royal families in the Gulf or the military governments in places like Egypt and Sudan. And the reason I was saying that is because I'd seen the movie before in Egypt,
Yep.
And here, what's even more remarkable in a way is that in Egypt you had a Muslim Brotherhood led government. Here you weren't even through the transition. It was like this kind of collection of people got together and were like, well, we're just more comfortable with the military government there, and obviously the Sudanese military itself was the primary actor here, but you have that Israeli official kind of saying the quiet part out loud. Mm-hmm. And I think we just have to reckon with this. Why would the world not take the lesson from us when we're so close to all these governments that are involved in the region and in the Abraham Accords, and then you see quotes like that and you see the actions of these governments, and where's the U.S. on democracy?
Yeah, it just feels like history is doomed to repeat itself, right? I mean, we backed all these autocrats in Iraq and Egypt and countless other places that led to these popular uprisings, which led to instability. I mean, it's a cycle.
And there's always some reason, right?
Yeah. Security.
Terrorism, security, stability, oil, Abraham Accords. There's always some issue other than democracy that justifies kind of, if not, because we're not supporting this. I'm not suggesting we are, but these governments that we're close to are, And I'm glad to see that we're talking to the Emiratis and the Egyptians about this. I think that the only thing that will make a difference is if people keep protesting, and if there's just a sense that this is just not going to sit with the public there. That's hard. It's a lot to ask of people, fatigue and people have lives and people have basic needs, and there's the risk of a crackdown. But really, it's these internal pressures. They don't just disappear because you have a coup. And my hope is that the combination of U.S. diplomacy and other countries and public pressure from within kind of at least keeps some embers burning for democracy that can then hopefully lead to something like what the transition was supposed to be.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So let's stay in the Horn of Africa for a bit and do a quick update on the civil war in Ethiopia. So it's been hard to get reports out of Ethiopia generally because of all the media blackouts and everything else. But there's been some reporting this week that the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, and another insurgent group said that they had captured back significant territory from the government. Remember, those are the two groups fighting. The Ethiopian government has been attacking the northern Tigray region in the TPLF that's up there. On Sunday, the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, posted a message on his Facebook page calling on people to, quote, destroy and bury the terrorist TPLF. So that was chilling. He also accused them of executing 100 young people in one of those captured towns that we were talking about earlier. And then just before we started taping, there were new reports that the Ethiopian government has declared a state of emergency and called on citizens to pick up arms and prepare to defend the capital. So very scary stuff. Hard to know exactly what's going on. The latter part I was just reading about, the call to pick up arms was in a New York Times report, datelined out of Kenya. So I'm not sure how close they are to the action. So we're going to try to keep making sense of this. But also, how the hell does Facebook allow the prime minister to post, destroy and bury the terrorist TPLF? How is that not a violation of their terms?
It's a good question, Tommy.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's not in the metaverse. That's here in the fucking Earth. That's here in the fucking universe. I mean, one thing that people need to keep in mind, too, that the TPLF, if you're looking in the newspaper and you just see the kind of little box of the map and then this little region up there, these are the guys that like used to run the country.
Yeah.
So like I always kind of wondered like maybe they'll win this war, and because it's not just like he's trying to crush some small province and settle some small dispute. These are the people that they know what they're doing here, and it looks like the momentum is with them. Now, if they end up overrunning Addis, the capital of Ethiopia, and there's bloodletting, I don't know what the future of Ethiopia looks like. I mean, it's just civil war, like mass atrocities in both directions, protracted, like famine. I mean, this is an utter catastrophe if it continues like this. And really the only solution to avert that is some kind of diplomatic ceasefire negotiation. Like nobody's going to quote unquote win this, or even if they do win, that victory is going to be followed by bloodletting and international isolation and humanitarian crisis. So looking at this now, it looks like the momentum is with the TPLF, but that doesn't change the fundamental equation that absent this getting into some negotiation, like it's just going to get worse for the people there.
Yeah, I feel like every day we talk about this, it's just going to get worse. And there's got to be some real pressure on the Ethiopian government in particular to get a ceasefire.
And Biden did some of the things you talked about, getting rid of those trade preferences. And, so they're trying. I think it's just going to take a lot of countries, not just the U.S., like just, everybody kind of coming in and saying, this has got to stop.
Yes, agreed. Let's talk about the prison at Guantanamo Bay for a minute, because last week an 8-member jury in a military commission trial made up of officers in the U.S. military heard testimony from a guy named Majid Khan, who he grew up in the suburbs of Maryland before becoming an al-Qaeda courier. These are facts. In 2012, Khan pleaded guilty to terrorism charges, including delivering $50,000 from al-Qaeda to an extremist group in Southeast Asia, and that money was then used to fund the bombing of a hotel in Indonesia. The hearing was to determine Khan's sentence, but what made it remarkable is that this was the first time an individual who had been tortured by the U.S. government at CIA black sites had testified publicly. Khan spoke for 2 hours about being waterboarded and about the sexual and psychological abuse and torture he endured in U.S. custody. At one point he said, quote, "The more I cooperated, the more I was tortured." And he just started making stuff up to try to stop this torture from happening. So it's a good reminder that torture does not work. So on Sunday, this jury issued its sentence. Now, the lowest possible sentence they could issue, given the framework provided to them, was 26 years. But then 7 of the 8 jurors sent along a letter calling the torture a stain on the moral fiber of America and a source of shame for the U.S. government. It was sort of a clemency letter. So you can thank the Bush administration, Ben, for these programs existing in the first place. Thank President Obama for banning them in 2009. But this is the first kind of like public reckoning we've really seen in a court in a long time. Khan has cut a deal with prosecutors that should end his sentence in 2025 at the latest. But I think the broader question is if and whether this clemency letter and the decision overall might impact future military commission cases for Gitmo detainees. So pretty big news.
It is. And man, this is like just awful stuff to
Horrifying.
read. And
Horrifying.
And we've seen versions of this, right, in news stories, in some of the accounts of Gitmo detainees who've been repatriated to other countries, and then they're interviewed. And it's always worse than like you even imagined. And I think that, look, number one, the excesses of those early years of the war on terror are astonishingly horrific and like a horrible chapter in our history. These were like literally authorized tactics, and part of, and that leads to the question of, I often wonder, like, could we or should we have done more in the Obama years to hold people to account, to be more transparent about this? The legal argument that ultimately Obama was persuaded by is if like the leadership of the Bush administration literally signed off on these tactics, prosecuting the people who carried them out, like in the prison cells, was, a difficult precedent to set, because you're holding people accountable for the orders they were following, which is obviously always a complicated thing. But when you read this, the sadism and excess of it makes you question that decision again.
Truly sadism.
And I do think, look, it's shameful that we've kind of moved on. Gitmo's still open. What the hell is it doing there? Everybody got to dunk on Obama for not being able to close it because Congress tied his hands, and then Trump obviously wasn't going to do it. How long are we going to keep this prison where we tortured all these people and that's a symbol for all this to the rest of the world open? We may have moved on as most Americans, but I tell you, the rest of the world made some serious decisions about what kind of superpower America was based on these things, and we've not reckoned with it. And so I think that one of the things that's going to have to happen at some point, and probably won't, but is some kind of almost like truth commission. There has to be a public accounting of what happened. In part as an accountability measure, but in part to make sure it never happens again. Yeah. I mean, what are we doing to learn from this? We're just looking away from it. I mean, that's my impression.
Yeah, and just wrapping these Gitmo detainees, guilty or not, in this sort of Kafkaesque, bureaucratic nightmare where they can't even have a trial for decades.
This was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we just went past the 9/11 anniversary, 20 years. I mean, how long? This is insane. These people have been in this legal morass. It just shows you how much we lost our way there.
Big time.
And it shows you again, Bush, Trump rightly, attracts a lot of attention. The Bush years, especially that first Bush term.
Pretty bad.
Not a high point.
Not a high point.
I mean, he hangs out with Ellen and Jerry Jones's box, and that's great. But this guy, let's not forget what happened.
Speaking of people who lost their way, let's shame some people who visited Saudi Arabia. So
that's fun.
Every year, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund hosts this big conference. It's called Davos in the Desert. That's what the cool kids say. Davos in the desert. It attracts lots of politicians.
Boy, that sounds like
it's just terrible.
Yeah.
Politicians and CEOs who desperately want Saudi investment dollars show up to this thing, and they genuflect before a sadist. In 2018, Davos in the Desert came only 20 days after the Saudi government executed a U.S.-based journalist named Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. You've heard us talk about that many times. That horrific murder of a journalist caused many, but not all, of the big-name participants in the Davos in the Desert conference that year to drop out. Big shots at J.P. Morgan, SoftBank, Goldman Sachs, Uber, Ford, leaders at the IMF, World Bank, other governments, they all canceled. This year's Davos in the Desert was last week, and an excellent NPR reporter named David Gura tweeted out a thread of all the morally bankrupt business vampires who came crawling back to suckle at the Saudi spigot. So here's a few names that are worth knowing. This guy Ray Dalio, a big investor, CEOs of BlackRock, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs. The insufferably named Lady Lynn Forrester de Rothschild was back. This is a person who took it upon herself to defend capitalism after the financial crisis.
Yeah.
Then she goes to the Saudi government. The U.S. government sent the Deputy Secretary of Commerce. That's I don't know. Frankly, that's kind of insulting to the Saudis, so that's fine. The former Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, showed up. He gave a speech. Remember, Steve Mnuchin's raising a big investment fund with mostly Gulf money.
Yep.
CEO of Carnival Cruises was there. Former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper was there. Journalists from CNN, Foreign Policy, and Euronews moderated panels. I don't know how you could get talked into that. Check out David's full Twitter thread if you want to see all the names. Then anyone you want to single out and name and shame. I just want to quickly point out, these are mostly billionaires. These are people who, if they never got another dollar from the Saudi government, would still be on private jets and houses in the Hamptons and et cetera. I'm not that I would excuse it if they were poor, but it just, I think, does speak to how utterly depraved you have to be to show up at this thing.
I mean, how much is enough for these people? To your point about them already being billionaires, this is so much the problem in the world today. Is that if you are always going to choose profit over any other value whatsoever, they're always going to be Mohammed bin Salmans who chop up journalists and invade their neighbors and cause humanitarian crises and kidnap prime ministers of other countries. I mean, this guy's
We
rap
never even
sheet-
mentioned that one. He
Yeah.
kidnapped the prime minister of Lebanon.
This guy's rap sheet is so long, and these guys go over there and suck up to him, and you know, shame on these people. Like they're also the kind of people that probably sit at their book parties in the Upper East Side and of New York and D.C. and lament the challenges to democracy. You are the problem.
Absolutely.
Like, you are the reason there's a problem with democracy. If there weren't people that went over and groveled before autocrats who chop up journalists, maybe things would be looking a little better for democracy. Because guess who else is over there? All the Trump people, the very same people that, you know, you say, well, you know, gosh, this is such a problem that we need to save democracy in America. Well, guess where, like, what happened to that crew? They're all like becoming billionaires themselves over there at the same conference at the Davos in the desert. It's not as if the first Davos wasn't bad enough, you know, sucking up to a sociopath.
Yeah, Lady Lynn Forrester DeRothschild was a huge Bill and Hillary Clinton supporter.
yeah.
Was so pissed that the Clinton lost to Obama in the primary that she switched over to support McCain and then other Republicans. But like again, during the
Really cost us a lot of votes
after the
when,
financial
we
crisis.
lost to Lady Lynn
Well, after
Davos.
the financial crisis, she decided that Occupy Wall Street was like really awful and that she needed to defend capitalism. One way you could defend capitalism is not by trying to get money from homicidal maniacs. Like, show the world that there's a line, that capitalism can be okay with some sort of framework and boundaries. But when you're like groveling to Mohammed bin Salman, you know, Occupy Wall Street seems pretty reasonable.
Well, the other thing that these people like to talk about is like how capitalism allows people to come up from the
out of poverty,
bootstraps and fosters competition. Where in that equation does a sociopath with $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, is that fair competition?
Yeah,
because he happens to have some
what
dirt.
bootstraps?
Yeah, like with oil in it that allows him to put on. I mean, I just. This should get more attention, right?
Gross.
And because like these are the kinds of things that like we're sitting in this country debating, you know, the school curriculum in Loudoun County. This is what's actually happening in the world. Like, this is the story of how people are getting screwed and why democracy is in recession and why, by the way, a lot of people feel grievances against the elite and the establishment. And yet, like, this is not what we're talking about, you know?
It's just the worst.
Yeah.
The worst.
And by the way, because if Democrats were smart, right, like, you would be going after,
Of course,
Mnuchin. Like what would Republicans be doing if the roles were reversed? And you could point to the fact that like all these senior Republican types are going over there and bootlicking the Saudis to line their pockets for their corrupt funds. The reason Democrats can't do it is because too many of our own donors and people go to the same shit and do the same stuff. So you know you don't hear word one about it.
Nope.
Wouldn't it be nice to be able to run an ad about Steve Mnuchin, like sitting over there? Sorry, you're looking.
It would be nice.
I go on, so I'll stop.
I hear you. Okay, so here's another issue that's annoying. A report issued by the Director of National Intelligence says about the lab leak theory and COVID-19 origin, says we still don't know conclusively whether COVID came from natural animal to human transmission or some sort of leak from a lab. So thanks for that one. Multi-billion-dollar intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. There we go.
I mean, you know, sometimes they don't have the answer.
Sometimes
it's
they
just
don't
like
have
it's
the
just, we just don't know. You know, something tells me on the outline that's not the last issue where that might be.
No. Okay. Here's another mystery that no one seems to be able to solve. Ben, Havana syndrome. So Havana syndrome, we've talked about it before on the show. It's this mysterious, sometimes debilitating ailment that was first reported in Cuba back in 2016, 2017. Today, there have been over 200 reported cases among American government officials in places around the world, including Washington, D.C. There have also been people in foreign governments who've said they had symptoms. Some in the U.S. government, especially the intelligence community, have settled on a theory that Havana syndrome is the result of an attack of some sort, most likely by the Russians. Congress passed a law to provide compensation to the victims of Havana syndrome, but there are also many people who don't believe that there is one thing causing Havana syndrome, and they believe that it is certainly not an attack, or certainly not proven to be an attack. So we've talked about, this issue before, but we wanted to outline the skeptical case because there have been some, really hard pushback, especially on Twitter, very caustic in some cases, to recent reporting about Havana syndrome that I think is worth airing. So scientists in particular have pushed back on the idea that a sonic weapon or a microwave weapon could create the kind of brain injuries that we're talking about, or that it could somehow like penetrate the brain and injure someone without harming surrounding tissue. Some scientists believe the most likely explanation is what's called a mass psychogenic illness, which is when people get sick because they think they were exposed to something. These same scientists point out the fact that there was this sound that was initially thought to be a sonic weapon attack that turned out to be really loud type of cricket. Now, that doesn't mean like the victims aren't suffering real symptoms, but it just means the cause is a mix of factors. One neurologist quoted in this one Times piece referred to the illness as being like depression or a migraine. They happen in that gray area where the mind and the brain intersect. So, Ben, the New Republic had a good piece about why I think it's important to pump the brakes a bit here. Trump's former defense secretary called Havana syndrome an act of war. The House Foreign Affairs Committee is working on sanctions. The Trump administration pulled everybody out of Cuba years ago, just blaming the Cubans for what happened. No one, I think, thinks that's the case now.
Anymore, yeah.
Marco Rubio accused skeptics of being influence agents paid by foreign governments. So again, obviously, I don't know what happened. I don't want to like upset any victims or doubt their suffering, but I do think this admonition to everybody to say, hey, stop saying this is some sort of Russian attack or else there's going to be a response is probably well taken.
Well, Dr. Rubio begs to differ. Tommy.
Dr. Rubio thinks I'm a
noted neurologist.
Yeah.
Look,
a red scare here.
I think it's right to balance this with skepticism in the sense that clearly there are some people that were injured, right? Like, then there's a larger pool of people that may not have been, right? And there's two things that I would just highlight from the skepticism case, positing that I do think something happened to some people and that the Russians are the most likely culprit. But the one is, I write about this in After the Fall, my book. I learned of this for the first time when I was in Cuba in July of 2017. I saw a friend from the embassy. He's like, yeah, these weird things are happening. And then like a few days later, I got violently ill. I was sick to my stomach. I had like ferocious headache. Think of your food poisoning and hangover all rolled into one, and it lasted like 2 days. And it was probably food poisoning, right? But there was like this part of me that was kind of like, well, I'm staying in a government hotel, and the Russians don't like me, and I could, in my worst moments, lying there sweating this out, talk myself into like, hey, did something just happen to me? And that's not to impugn people. It's just that when you hear that there's bad things happening to people and who are serving in diplomatic posts, and that these are the symptoms like headaches and vertigo type symptoms, you get those symptoms and you might think that that's it, right? So that's one thing that's bears in mind.
The worst part of getting sick is when you don't know what it is.
When you don't know what it is.
Freaking out. You're WebMDing.
I think the second thing that's right to tap the brakes is like the Russia. This is the same thing that happened in all the Russia stuff, the Russia investigation stuff, is that there's a core of like very true concerns. That doesn't mean that we have to like hang every ornament on the tree and say it's Russia, and like let's establish what we know and try to work out from there what to do about it. You can feel like what's so interesting about Rubio is that the same guy who was using this to like close our embassy in Havana a few years ago is now like using this as part of his anti-Russia politics. That doesn't seem like someone who's being informed by like the science of this.
No, he's pathologically stupid.
Yeah, well, there's that too. It's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I think your note is good. I don't want anyone listening who may have suffered from this or know someone who'd like to feel like we're doubting them. We are not.
No, we're not. We're
not.
But
I do think that if the U.S. government is going to respond, it should be based on real hard evidence, and it doesn't sound like anyone thinks we're there.
Yeah.
Ben, a few quicker things to sort of close out the show. This might be the dumbest thing I've heard in a long time, and I barely understand it. It's so stupid. The Federal Election Commission has ruled that foreign donors can finance U.S. referendum campaigns. So current law says foreign nationals can't donate to U.S. candidates or political action committees. Makes sense to me. These idiots, the FEC, now seem to think it's fine if some foreign corporation or some foreign billionaire finances like a ballot initiative in California, I think. Here's an example of why it could be problematic. Axios mentioned this example. In Maine, there's a Canadian power company that is paying to promote a ballot initiative to get, I think, the state to pay for more power lines. Right? That seems like a huge conflict of interest that should not be allowed. They tried to pass a bill to prevent that from happening. The governor vetoed it. the good news is that states can ban these kinds of donations, but like, what the hell?
This is insane.
How is this happening?
Yeah, I don't know how this is happening. And like this reinforces, this is not like, we had 15 years ago, like publicly financed elections in this country, right?
Remember McCain-Feingold?
Yeah. And then Citizens United gets rid of that. And I think one of the underappreciated problems in our democracy is like all the sets of money flooding into politics, dark money flooding into politics, and foreign money flooding. Remember when Obama stood up in the State of the Union and said there's going to be foreign funding for elections, and like Scalia's like, no, there won't. That's a lie or something. Yeah. And it's like, and here we are like 10 years later talking about like foreign corporations could finance self-interested referenda in American states. That is insane. The FEC should not approve this. They should replace the FEC commissioners who did. Like, we need to turn the tide on just across the board this kind of lack of regard for who's financing elections and campaigns and politics in this country.
Yeah. Run the most jingoistic campaign against us you possibly can. Accuse Democrats of accepting donations from, I don't know, name some boogeyman country. But yeah, we should ban this.
Yeah.
How is this possible?
Yeah, this is crazy.
Another one. Last week we talked about Boston Celtics center and former guest on the show, Enes Kanter, his criticism of the Chinese government for its policy in Tibet and for the genocide against the Uyghurs. That advocacy online did not go over well in Beijing. Streams of Celtics games are now blocked in all of China. Enes tripled down over the weekend, tweeting, "The genocidal Chinese government and the insecure tyrant behind it all, Xi Jinping, must not be allowed to host the upcoming Winter Olympics. Say no to Beijing 2022. So this is a great story about Enes just being like a full-throated advocate for human rights, and a ballsy one at that. But also, we're going to hear a lot more of this.
This is coming.
Beijing 2022 boycott is coming.
Is he getting minutes?
I don't know.
Because you're the I
haven't watched a single regular season
he was kind of not getting minutes, and I was curious about that. But like he clearly is just, there's like a joy in his trolling on this that it doesn't feel like, I mean, he's saying things often that everybody knows to be true, but that certain people never say, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's kind of testing the limits of free speech, really. But I think you're right to home in on this one point, which is that, like, this Olympics question is not going away.
Not going away. And it's very reasonable.
And I don't see how the momentum doesn't build towards a boycott. Like, it's hard to see, given the reality of what's happening to the Uyghurs and giving people standing up and expressing their views like this, it's going to be a hard case to make against the boycott, absent China taking some corrective action, which there's about a 0% chance that they will. So I think this is going to be with us.
Yeah, I think it's going to be with us too. I went to ESPN to see if how Enes is doing in terms of minutes. It looks like he's averaging 2 points a game, maybe getting like 5 minutes.
He's getting some run.
Yeah, he's going to run. The real upside here was there was a video that just live played with Enes Kanter and another teammate teaching Taco Fall how to swim. Taco Fall, for listeners who don't know, is I think 7'7". So it's very funny.
That's good.
Watching them swim in the pool. Anyway, enough basketball from us. Ben, the Bravo series, The Real Housewives, is coming to Dubai, the capital of the United Arab Emirates. I wonder if the cast will include Princess Latifa Al Maktoum, the Emir of Dubai's daughter. She was the one who tried to escape from Dubai in 2018 and then was kidnapped by some like commando unit when she was on a boat and forcibly returned to the country. Or maybe it will include some domestic workers who were trafficked to the UAE and now are treated as slave labor. I'm guessing there won't be any gay cast members since homosexuality is illegal and consensual sodomy can get you 10 years in prison in the UAE. Also, you can't drink alcohol, so what the fuck are they going to do? What is Bravo thinking?
I mean, yeah, you're not going to have the rosé subplots here.
Real Housewives Xinjiang.
I mean, what you've seen in the past is like a lot of money spent by the Emirates to almost subsidize some of this stuff. Like, and full disclosure, I'm an MSNBC contributor, but CNN, there were some stories recently about like they have a partnership with the Emirates to kind of promote the expo that they're hosting. Yeah. But in some of this is CNN just as journalistic partner for the expo. That's fine. right? But then there's like all these stories and packages about come visit the Emirates because it has it. Or did you see the thing online of like the tour of that hotel suite that is like in I think it's in Dubai.
It's like gold leaf.
Gold leaf, everything.
I saw that.
So they're selling this kind of luxury brand.
Yes, yes.
That is like, what's kind of sad about it, to be fair to the Emirates, is like it's kind of an American. Like it's like look how rich and successful these people are and how pristine their lives are. Just don't pay attention to all the stuff happening over here.
Awful.
But
Awful.
I'm so glad you did what you did, because it's like every time you see Dubai, Abu Dhabi, just remember all those other things you just talked about.
Built on slave labor.
Yeah.
Gay people can't live. They'll get thrown in jail.
Critics of the government are hounded.
Yeah.
There have been foreign PhD students in prison because they didn't like the research they were doing.
Yep.
So it has like the appearance of this kind of modern, almost progressive society, and then underneath the hood, it's not exactly what's happening.
Bad idea, Bravo. Ben, did you notice that Facebook changed its name last week to Meta?
I noticed.
You catch this?
Yeah, great rollout. Very successful rollout.
I watched a chunk of that event.
You planned a few rollouts, Tommy. Did you ever have one that clung to quite like that?
It landed, yeah. It was hours of just like painfully awkward hand talking. Here's a funny story. So the BBC reported on the fact that Meta sounds like the Hebrew word for dead. So Twitter users in Israel have been having a lot of fun with that.
There we go. I mean, like that's. I mean,
it's too good.
You know what? You know what we may have figured out?
What?
It may be hell.
Oh, that's
like hell may actually be Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse.
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you're bad and you do bad things in life and you die,
you're just
you
stuck.
may just float into some room with Mark Zuckerberg's apparition talking to you about how cool his new gadget is.
It's like Poltergeist. Yeah, you just go into the TV.
Yeah.
That's actually that's too real. So this BBC story mentioned some past translation errors by companies. Here's a few favorites. When KFC went to China in the 1980s, their motto, finger licking good, was translated into Mandarin as eat your fingers off. That was good. Rolls-Royce had to change the name of a car called the Silver Mist because in Germany, the name translated to silver excrement. Like that one. Nokia's Lumia phone was a misfire in Spain because it translated to prostitute in some dialects. And the Honda Fitta had to change its name because it translated to a vulgar name for vagina in Swedish. So corporate branding is getting dicey up there.
Here I thought our pronunciations were bad.
Yeah,
you can do a lot worse.
You could do a lot worse. The Biden administration delayed. Can we get some spooky sort of War of the Worlds sound underneath this, please? Thank you. The Biden administration delayed the public release of thousands of documents that pertain to the 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So Biden's team cited delays in the declassification review process that were caused by the pandemic. Trump also delayed the release of these documents back in 2017. Understandably, Ben, this has gotten a lot of people wondering about whether there's government cover-up. Big chunks of the country already don't believe that Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman. It's not likely that there's a smoking gun file about to be released that says, hey, the CIA did it or whatever. But I do think scholars think there could be information about the government's efforts to stop organized crime or the CIA's failed covert actions in Cuba trying to assassinate Castro, or whether Lee Harvey Oswald had ties to CIA-backed exiled groups. You got any theories on what might be in here, or whether it's reasonable to say that all these years later there could be some information that could actually be harmful to national security? This seems absurd to me.
It seems totally absurd to me. And people always ask me, like, did you figure out when you're in government, it's the two things people always ask about are Area 51 and the Kennedy assassination
and the moon landing.
And unfortunately, I had no.
Mostly Emily Favreau.
Yeah. I should have gone over and read the files, but look, the amount of time that's passed, it's insane to claim. This is 60 years ago in a totally different context of a Cold War. All the people involved are dead. I have no possible reason I can think of. There's clearly some shit that went down in Mexico. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but just who he was associating with, and a lot of theories were just they were embarrassed that they didn't, roll up this guy given everybody he was associating with. I will tell you, I used to have these crazy things with the Cubans when I was negotiating with the Cubans, particularly at the beginning, because they would always assert, as if it was a fact, we know that, that Lee Harvey Oswald was working with these Cuban exile groups, and that's, and so it was always weird because they
like, you got a guy, you got sources?
I was like, you want to give me some information here?
Paper on
this? The serious point I make is that not releasing this information, conspiracy theories are very destructive. I mean, today,
dude, totally.
There are a bunch of fucking lunatics in Dallas, waiting for JFK Jr.
literally
to turn up at the spot of his father's assassination. Right?
Hundreds of people.
Now, that's because those people are insane, and Facebook locks them in kind of strange echo chambers of conspiracy theory. But it's also kind of tied to this, paranoid mind that was fueled by the lack of transparency around the JFK. So the point is that the national security people, of which I used to be one, make these arguments about the cost of the revelations of certain sources, methods, tactics, even if they're in the past. There is a cost to not being transparent. The cost is insane distrust of government and conspiracy theory. And just release everything already. Just put it all out. No redactions. What are we doing here? This is insane.
Yeah, we are giving. Look, we can make fun of the QAnon types, but we're giving them fodder.
Yeah.
And you know what? Google COINTELPRO. There's a lot of reasons to mistrust the government, to think that we've been lied to think that there have been cover-ups. I mean, the U.S. government's done a lot of terrible things over time, and the only way to deal with it is some sort of disclosure, transparency, reconciliation. I mean, look, I will take them at their word that they need to do this declassification review, that COVID slowed it down. I do not take them. I don't believe for a second that the CIA has real sources and methods concerns besides being worried about feeling embarrassed.
What are the statute of limitations on it boggles the mind to think that something in 1963 is still a sensitive national security.
And all the people who lived through this trauma will never see the truth because they're all going to be dead by the time it's out.
Yeah, it's insane. It's absurd.
I also always think about living in that period of time, 63, JFK's assassination, and then 68, you have King and Bobby Kennedy. I mean, I can imagine.
I would never trust anything again. If I lived through that, I would never,
lies about Vietnam.
No wonder we end up with, Ronald Reagan. Because everybody else is just fuck this.
Yeah.
This is fucking bullshit.
This place is a nightmare. Give you that happy talk actor guy.
Yeah.
He'll tell me it's going to be okay.
Or just they sat it out. I mean, it's just, it's insane to me that happened. And eerie that it happened. And, people are right to ask a lot of questions about it.
Release the documents.
Just release the documents.
They're just giving Alex Jones 700 more shows.
Yeah, 2 more Oliver Stone movies, and maybe we'll figure it out.
Then I made the mistake of looking at Twitter.
Oh no! Yeah, I glanced
right before the outro, and it seems like people are freaking out. So that sucks.
I will say that Cree Deeds lost by how many points in 2009? It was double digits, I think, or close to it. And Barack Obama was handily reelected, although that was when we didn't quite have this total sociopath running the Republican Party preparing to run for president again. But it would not be great.
We usually lose these off-year Virginia races. Right now it's 58% in, 55-44 Youngkin. That's not good. My concern is about 2022.
It's less than great.
Losing the House, Senate.
My concern is also that, Youngkin, it feels like, to connect it to the worldo issues, the guy who is running as the leader of a base of people that are kind of far right nationalists, but throws on a fleece and is a businessman.
He tuned to the right frequency.
It's dangerous. It's kind of dangerous, right? They may have hacked something here that it's not my hot take. It's just kind of
that's my hot anxiety.
Yeah, it's hot anxiety.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Is that this is a model that can be replicated in congressional races and in other countries too, frankly, where what we've seen in the past is if you have the completely objectional, nutcase, that's one thing. But sometimes you get the guy in the fleece.
Yeah, sometimes you get the guy in the fleece.
Who, by the way, worked at the freaking Carlyle Group.
I know.
They probably had like a sponsored tent at Davos.
Oh,
in the
absolutely.
Desert,
They're probably giving out like
yeah,
little
probably
fans.
have swag. They probably have merch.
Little bone saws.
Carlyle merch over there.
Oh God.
Remember when the Carlyle Group was like the boogeyman to the Democrats?
Yeah. Why was that?
Yeah. Our like
Bush
super
people?
awesome new producer Haley Muse is like looking at me like,
Wrap it up.
how old are you guys? Like
Oh.
remember Tommy? Remember
29.
in 2003 when the Carlyle Group was like the yeah, it's just
MTV played videos.
yeah. MTV definitely.
All right. That's all we got. Thanks again, Mr. Rudd. And we'll see you next week when, maybe every Democrat will be pooping their pants like Scott Morrison in a McDonald's. So here
Or
we
there'll
are.
be some wonderful Steve Kornacki comeback.
Yeah, rabbit out of a hat.
narrated
Yeah,
content.
we'll stay hopeful.
Yeah, we'll
Stay hopeful.
Oh, well,
I'm having a
by the time this drops, okay.
yeah. I'm having a drink tonight.
Yeah,
How
I'm
about
having a
that?
drink either way.
Okay.
See ya.